the Chicago Bears have already followed up their cuts yesterday with making an additional cut, possibly opening up more roster spots to go after somebody on the waiver wire. We're going to talk about the player that they cut today. We're also going to talk about recently cut players from other teams the Bears should consider signing, and do all that, plus talk about the players the Bears could regret not holding on to. We're going to get into all that and more right after this.
You are now tuned in to Chicago Bears Central, your number one place for all Chicago Bears news and content.
What's going on, Bears fans? Welcome to another episode of Chicago Bears Central, your number one spot for everything Chicago Bears related. I'm the host here, Haize, holding it down for C-Dub and Bobby. Make sure you guys are following the show at Chi Bears Central on every social media platform we're on. But with that being said, we've got an update. And this literally came down right before I started recording this episode. The Chicago Bears have cut defensive end Terrel Lewis. This is a 25-year-old defensive end that showed a lot of promise for the Chicago Bears in his training camp and in preseason, and was what many people thought were one of the reasons the Chicago Bears felt comfortable cutting Trevis Gipson. So, we'll see what that ends up meaning for Terrell Lewis. I think with the talent that he showed, he's absolutely going to get in on another team, but that is a waiver that I did not expect to read this morning coming into recording the show. Let me know what you guys think. Do you think the Chicago Bears could regret not holding on to Terrell Lewis? But with that being said, one of the topics I already wanted to talk to you guys about were players that the Bears could absolutely regret cutting in their waiver wire. And so, now Terrell Lewis goes to the top of that list, at least personally for me. You guys can let me know. I definitely think that young guy who, he played linebacker before, kind of got to move to defensive end for the Chicago Bears. And I thought that the Bears were really high on him and his potential there. And that's one of the reasons that they moved on from Trevis Gipson. So he's definitely moves towards the top of that list for me. But outside of that, I do think the Bears could regret waiving Micah Baskerville. I think he showed a lot of promise for the Chicago Bears. A little bit less so after they acquired Mykal Walker, but I definitely think he is one as well. I do think also Trevis Gipson does deserve to be on that list. He's young. He's a guy who, clearly isn't meant to be the anchor on that defensive line. But as a depth piece to an improved defensive line, I do think that he can. If you are bringing him in to an already solid D-line, I do think that Trevis Gipson could turn some heads this season depending on what team he goes to. Now, I know people are going to say, well, when offenses focused on him, he really didn't give us anything, and he looked good against second and third strings, and those are all valid points. But I do think there's something to be said that him being always lined up with like a player like Walker or Yannick Ngakoue, and then how that interior defensive line is shaping up with the youth that we have there and the veterans, I do think that this could have been a season that Trevis Gipson looked much better. But again, maybe the Bears just did not want to pay that potential price tag for Trevis Gipson. Another one on that defensive line, Travis Bell. This is a guy who, again, 7th round rookie that, I think that, with some developing, he could still get in on the practice squad. But I do think that if he does end up going somewhere else and he gets an opportunity to develop with veterans and things like that, this is a guy that we could look back and say, hey, you remember when he was a Bear? But again, with the fact that we have Pickens, we have Javon Dexter, I think we're going to be fine as far as into the future on that interior defensive line. But this is still another guy that kind of in a vacuum, depending on where he goes and how he develops, could absolutely be somebody that the Bears miss. Next up, defensive end Anthony Jones. Now, listen, There's the Bears last year through an undrafted rookie in Jack Sanborn got a guy that is now projected and will be, especially with the injury to Noah Sewell, their starter to start the season. Anthony Jones is somebody that I just looked at and I really thought that he was going to fight for a roster spot. I think that he had a fairly strong training camp. Didn't look the best as far as in preseason, but I think that there's some there. But again, he's another guy that could absolutely pop up on that practice squad and end up staying around for the Chicago Bears. Next up is Michael Ojemudia. And so this is a guy that, the Bears have a lot of young cornerbacks and Tyreek Stevenson, Tyler Scott that are, Terrell Smith that are projected to really, fight for a rotation spot. Like Tyreek Stevenson is going to be the starter day one, right? We have a lot of young talent in that secondary, and between him and Terrell Smith, I said Tyler Scott earlier, him and Terrell Smith, they're part of that big part of that future for the Chicago Bears secondary, and a secondary that I think is going to be overall well. But Ojemudia, I really liked the way that he played. I like the way that he went about the game. I think that he's somebody that the Bears could also look back, depending on the situation, look back and say, hey, we kind of should have kept that. And last on the list for me is Kendall Williamson. I like this guy a lot. When you're drafted, you kind of almost expect them to kind of make the roster. But I think when you look at Elijah Hicks and the way that he stepped up at that safety position and kind of with the writing was on the wall. But again, he's another guy that could be a developmental piece that gets on that practice squad. So if he stays internal with the Chicago Bears, we'll see. We'll still be able to develop that talent. You never know, depending on what may happen. We may have a spot in cornerback next year. So a lot of guys that I think that the Bears could look at and ultimately regret in a way. But again, that's kind of in a vacuum just for how good that player ends up performing. But kind of flip side that a little bit. I want to talk about players that the Chicago Bears could go out and try to sign that were waived yesterday. Like you said, I already seen Terrel Lewis waived by the Chicago Bears, so that could be setting up a spot for one of these guys to come in. The first one I'm going to mention is cornerback Darius Rush. This guy's a 5th-round pick just from this year. Big, physical cornerback, right? And that, when you look at somebody who can come in and maybe develop for you, right? And especially if the Bears decide to, Jalen Jones just go a different route or something like that. This guy was a 5th-round pick. And during the draft, he was actually projected to go a little bit higher than that, right? So I think that this is a guy that in Darius Rush that could develop into a nice player for you, a nice depth piece for you. But again, that secondary is probably one of the strongest position groups that we have. So, we could see something happen like that. If they want to bring him in, he'll be practice squad eligible. If another team doesn't pick him up, I think they will. So if the Bears pick him up, it's going to have to be on the 53-man roster. But this is a guy I like a lot. Now, with us already cutting Terrell Lewis, another one that I want to talk about is Janarius Robinson. Now, this is a guy, defensive end. He was cut by the Philadelphia Eagles. Reportedly, he had a strong preseason and camp for them. I can't say that I've watched every single snap for the Philadelphia Eagles to be able to report on how he performed. I saw myself, but reading reports, this guy did pretty good. He had a rough final game in the preseason, so that's what maybe it had forced him or wrote the story on him being on his way out. But like this guy could develop into a nice pass rusher in the NFL. So that's a guy that the Bears absolutely could look at. Now, the Bears also picked up Feeney, who's going to project to be a guard/center for them. But another one that the Bears could look at, and this is a 3rd-round pick from the 2021 draft. This is Tyree Phillips, a guy who I think can come in. He's an offensive tackle, right? Yes, we have J. Tyree Carter at that tackle position that we can look at. I'm sorry, we have when you look at Braxton Jones, Darnell Wright, Larry Borum, right? That we have options at that tackle position that absolutely could step in and play well. But if the Bears want a look at a solid, young offensive tackle that they could develop, especially like you've sent off Leatherwood and things like that, Tyree Phillips is absolutely somebody that could step into that and help those things a little bit. I think Larry Borum is absolutely a better player than him right now, but you could look at him as well. And then a player on special teams that the Chicago Bears could look at, and that is wide receiver Trent Taylor. But I think if the Bears do bring him in, it's going to be more so for punt returner. We talked about on yesterday's cut deadline special that really with the cuts, the punt returner de facto is going to be Velus Jones on kick and punt returns, right? Or maybe Tyler Scott factoring in there as well. If the Bears want to solidify up that spot a little bit, wide receiver Trent Taylor could absolutely be one, right? Not really factoring into the wide receiver positional room for the Chicago Bears, but he was a 6th-round pick in the 2022 draft. He averages 10.3 yards per return and could be a spark plug for the Chicago Bears. So this is another player that the Bears could potentially look at if they want to bring in some talent there. Now, there's also reports that the Bears are interested in Colt McCoy. We had reports late last night and earlier this morning that the Bears are keeping an eye out for veteran quarterback depth. Colt McCoy is absolutely who could come in there. He's a 3rd-round pick in the 2010 draft, a player who's been around the NFL for over a decade. He could be somebody that can come in and provide a little bit of that veteran depth at that quarterback position, just in case Tyson Bagent, Justin Fields, Justin Fields is the de facto number 1, right? You're not going to take away any snaps from Justin Fields, but if for some reason Justin Fields does go down, Tyson Bagent doesn't necessarily look the best and the way that he looked in preseason games, you could go after a veteran in Colt McCoy that played last for the Arizona Cardinals. Over the course of his career, he's played in 55 games. He has 764 completions out of 1,220 attempts. That's a completion percentage of 62%. He's passed for a little under 8,000 yards over his NFL career and 34 touchdowns. Now, that since 2010, that's 12 years. That's not huge numbers at all. But again, because the Bears would primarily be looking at depth, that could be a situation that the Bears could bring him in as that veteran quarterback kind of hold that clipboard, maybe help guide, mentor Tyson Bagent a little bit, even though Tyson's thrown so many passes in college. One could say, hey, what could Colt McCoy really show for him? But as the Bears are looking for that depth at that quarterback position, he could absolutely be one option for the Bears there as well. So that's kind of where everything sits after cut day for the Chicago Bears. They're still going to be active. That's one thing that we do absolutely know about the Chicago Bears team is they are going to be active regardless, right? And so as we also wait to hear the severity of an injury for like Noah Sewell and what he ends up being, right? Because if he ends up, there's some calls and rumors that he can miss the majority of the season. The Bears could look at maybe revisiting some linebacker depth that they waived or maybe some other linebacker depth out there as well. But let me know what you guys think on everything down below. That's my time for today. Make sure you guys are following the show at Chi Bears Central. You can send us any feedback, question, comments, concerns, ChicagoBearsCentral@gmail.com. And then lastly, if you want to leave a text message and our voicemail for our mailbag, the number to do so, 773-242-9336. We are the #1 spot for everything Chicago Bears related, thanks to you guys. And like we like to end every episode on, Chi-Town up, Bear down. Love you guys. Peace, y'all.
This has been a presentation of the Break Media.